We continue now at the top of Daf Yud Aleph on Beis in Meseches Kiddushin. This is Kiddushin Daf 11b. On the previous summon, Rav Yehuda said that Rav Asi said that anytime the Torah mentions Kesef, it's talking about the Kesef Tzuri, and anytime the Rabbanan mention Kesef, it's talking about Kesef Medina. And the Gemara asks, is that really a rule of Harei Taina? But what about the case of Taina, of a claim? That's talking about a situation where someone claims money from someone else, and then the other individual is Modev and Mixas, he admits to part of it. T'chsiv, because over there it's written, Ki yiten ishal reyeu kesef o kelim lishmor. It says a person gives to his friend kesef or vessels, kelim, lishmor, to watch. Utnan, we learned in the Mishnah, Shvuas hadayanim, this oath of the judges, hataina shtei kesef, the original claim, what the person is saying he's owed, that's 2 kesef. V'hahodah shava pruta. And when we talk about modev and mixas, admitting part of it, that can even be at the value of a pruta. And so the Gemara is asking, we'll see Rashi in a moment, the Gemara is asking, this doesn't seem to follow the rule of Rav Yehuda Amar Rav Asi. Rashi says, V'harei taina, but what about the case of a claim? Sha'adam toin es chavero. One person claims his friend, u'mashabiyano som hodev mixas. We say there's a shvu if the other person is modev mixas, if he admits to part of it. T'chsiv kiyite nish v'gomer. Again, the pasuk says that one man gives to his friend kesef o kelim. V'yolav ksiv asher yomar ki huzeh. It's on that pasuk where it says, the other one says ki huzeh. The alfinan mina, we learn from that phrase in the pasuk, sha'modev mixas yishave. That's what we learn out the halacha, that somebody who admits to part of it has to take an oath. V'nikra of balabayas hasam ksiv v'darshinan le'lashvua. That's where it also says the phrase v'nikra of balabayas. We understand that to mean an oath. And when it talks about in the pasuk one man giving to his friend kesef o kelim, what's the amount? Utanan shvuas hadayanim. We learn in the Mishnah this oath eino bepachos mitaina shtei moos kesef. It's not less than 2 moos of silver. Upligi ba Rav u'Shmuel. There's a machlokas between Rav and Shmuel. Rav amar kfira shtei kesef. Rav says we're talking about denying 2 kesef. U'Shmuel amar taina atzma shtei kesef. And Shmuel says the claim is 2 kesef. Ve'afilo lo kafar ba ela pruta. Even if he only denied a pruta, a hoda bepruta, or only admitted to a pruta, chayiv, in that case he's chayiv in terms of the oath. In any case, mikol makom, nevertheless, what do we see from here? Mida katani shtei kesef. The point is that it says that the amount of the claim is 2 kesef. So shma mina kra lav dafka kesef kamer. You see that the pasuk, when it says ki yitein ishal reo kesef, it doesn't specifically mean exactly a kesef. Ela amamona bialma, but it just means money in general. V'kevan shelo pirish kamo, and since it doesn't say exactly how much, lo masra kesef ela lechachamim, the pasuk gives it over to the chachamim to determine the amount. V'lo kimlu l'rabbanan lash. And the Rabbanan say there shouldn't be an oath from less than this amount. The ikra dafka kesef ksiv, because the point is if the pasuk only meant kesef, so nihi demahi, granted that the amount would be in terms of what kind of coin, it would be a ma. That's matbeya hapchusa shabetzuri. That's the smallest kind of coin in Suri. But miu shtayim minalahu. But nevertheless, where would we get the idea of having 2 kesef? According to Rashi, we'll see an alternative explanation in Rashi in a moment. But according to Rashi's explanation of the Gemara, the real basis of the question is from the fact that it says shtei kesef. From the fact that the amount is shtei kesef, that means that we're not taking kesef literally. Whereas Rav Yehuda Amar Rav Asi, he said that any time it says kesef in the Torah, it's talking about kesef tzuri, he was taking kesef literally. It wouldn't be 2 kesef. That's the basis over here of the Gemara's question. And the Gemara then answers, Hasam over there, Dumya de Kalim. The reason why we say over there it's 2 kesef is because we're comparing it to Kalim in the pasuk. Ma Kalim Shnayim, just like Kalim is in the plural, it means 2. Af kesef Shnayim, so too by kesef. That's how we have the source that it means 2 kesef. Uma kesef davar chashav, and just like by kesef it has to be something that's chashav, something that's important. Af Kalim, so too by Kalim, it can't just be any kli. It has to be davar chashav. It has to be something that's important. And Rashi says, Hachi Garsina Numa Kesef Davar Chashav, just like Kesef is something Chashav. Av Kalim Davar Chashav, so too the Kalim is Davar Chashav. Sheyushavim Shtei Kesef. What's Chashav? It has to be worth Shtei Kesef. Ulafukim Iman Damar Hasam, that comes to exclude the other Man Damar, the other sheet over there that says Tanu Shnei Machtin Chayiv, that even if it's 2 needles you're Chayiv, Bahudas Achas Man, if he admits to one of them, Lakachi Yatsu Kalim Lamashein Kilomar, she is Chayiv Kalim B'cholshu. That's what that other sheet says, that the Kalim is any Kli that's used for whatever purpose. Kalim Kolshu is enough. And so that's Rashi's explanation. The whole back and forth over here is, why would we say 2 kesef? That seems to go against the idea that any kesef that's said in the Torah is meant to be taken literally, kesef tzuri. And then the Gemara answered over there, it's a drasha that we're comparing kesef to Kalim. And Rashi offers the alternative explanation. For Abu Seinim Mefarshim, our rabbis, they explain as follows. Shahadinar hu matbeya hapchusa shebetzuri. That actually the smallest kind of denomination, the smallest kind of coin of tsuri, is actually a dinar. Upira Bircha midukatani shtei kesef shein mos. And the question has nothing to do with the shtei. It's not the fact that it's two of them. The question is that we're saying it's shtei kesef, which is shtei mos. Now, if we were talking about suri, it should have been a dinar, it shouldn't have been mos. And then the answer of the Gemara is, according to this version, ma kalim davar chashav, that just like kalim are chashav, it's in the reverse. It's not that just like kesef is chashav, but just like kalim is chashav, af kesef davar chashav, so too by kesef, it's something chashav, u'ma'a davar chashav, when a ma is a davar chashav. And so again, the basis of the question was that if you're looking for the smallest denomination, that should be the dinar, and the answer was it has to be davar chashav, and that's why we talk about a ma. Uledidi kasha be'tuvin. Now Rashi says, according to me, that's very difficult. Chada de imkein, number one, if so, to chol kesef ha'amr b'torah dinarhu, that when it says kesef in the Torah, it should always mean a dinar. So hechi asya hachakeshu mafkale. So how does this hekesh come along and undo that? Hakiyasa hekeshu lashminan makelim shnayim af kesef shnayim hudasa. The hekesh should really be, the comparison should really be, just like kalim is two, so too kesef is two. V'yod ma kalim davar chashav, and furthermore, if you're going to say that we're talking about the fact that kalim is a davar chashav, v'chi machat davar chashavu is a machat a davar chashav, meaning the point over here is, I understand if you're saying that we're talking about the idea of 2 versus 1, so then you could say kalim is in plural, and we're learning from kalim to kesef. But if you're going to say ma kalim davar chashav, if that's the idea, who says kalim is a davar chashav? It doesn't have to be a davar chashav, it could be a machat, it could be a needle. V'amrinan hasam lakach yatsu kalim l'mashu, that's what we even say over there. Amalo chashivi machtim, the point over there is that a machat is not considered a chashav. V'yod behed yamrinan hasam ibcha, and also over there we say the exact opposite. It's ma kesef davar chashav, it goes in the other direction. Just like kesef is a davar chashav, af kalim davar chashav, so to kalim, v'chesef ki asa lahach drasha, and that's what the kesef is used for in terms of the drush, and so therefore Rashi rejects the interpretation of the Rabbo Seinu. And the Gemara continues, v'harei meiser, but what about what we find by meiser sheni? That also seems to be a question on Rav Yehuda Amar Avasi. Techsiv, as it's written, v'tzarta hakesef biyodcha, it says you're going to take the money in your hand. That's talking about when you redeem meiser sheni onto money. Utnan, and we learned in the Mishnah, haporet sela mimos meiser sheni. It says, let's say a person takes from the money of the meiser sheni and he puts the money onto a sela. And Rashi explains the question, haporet sela mimos meiser sheni maskana. The maskana of that Mishnah is beishamai omer bechol hasela mos v'chulu. Beishamai say you exchange the mos for an entire sela. Umiu, but nevertheless, shamina mina. What do we see from this Mishnah? We see shachila tchila hameiser beprutos shal nechoshes, that originally the meiser sheni was redeemed onto copper prutos. V'yata balifrot b'hansela. Now you're taking that and putting it onto a sela. And the point over here is if that it was originally on prutos of nechoshes, that can't be talking about suri. And Rav Yehuda Amar Avasi said that anytime the Torah says kesef, it's talking about kesef tzuri, and kesef tzuri there is no nechoshes, there is no copper, so you see it's not kesef tzuri over here. And the Gemara answers that over there, when it comes to meiser sheni, kesef ha-kesef ribu, it doesn't just say kesef, it says ha-kesef, and that is an inclusion. And therefore from the extra hey, we're learning out that there we're not talking specifically about mos tzuri, but we're talking about any kind of money. And the Gemara continues, Vare Hektish, but what about what we find by Hektish? Techsiv, as it's written in the Pasuk, V'nasan ha-kesef v'kamlo. Again, it says he gives the money. And again, if we're going like Rav Yehuda Amar Avasi, so that should have to be kesef tzuri. V'yamar Shmuel, but Shmuel says, Hektish shaveh moneh shechilo al shaveh pruta. If you have a Hektish that's worth a moneh, and it's redeemed on a shaveh pruta, mechulo, that's considered to be redeemed. And so here also you see, we're talking about prutos, we're not talking about the money of tzuri. And the Gemara says, Hasam Nami, there are also kesef yolef mimaiser. It says kesef over there, and it says kesef mimaiser sheni. We learn a gzeir shava, just like over there we're talking about pruta, so too over here we're talking about pruta. But the Gemara continues, V'arei kiddusha isha, but what about the kiddushin of a woman? Techsiv, as it's written in the pasuk, Ki yikach ish isha, it says a man takes a woman, uva'olah, v'gamar kicha misad Ephron, and we learn out the word kicha from the field of Ephron. Utnan, and what do we learn in our Mishnah? Beis Hillel omrim bepruta v'shava pruta, that Beis Hillel say the amount for a kiddushin is a pruta, or a shava pruta. So Neymar Ravasi, Damar Beis Shammai, are we going to say that Ravasi follows Beis Shammai? If Ravasi is saying that every time the Torah mentions kesef, so it's talking about suri, so it can't be a pruta. So Ravasi has to follow Beis Shammai. And so the Gemara says, you're right, Ela I itmar hachi itmar. Rather, if you're going to say anything from Rav Yehuda Amar Ravasi, it should be as follows. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Ravasi, Rav Yehuda says that Ravasi says, Kol kesef kotzav ha'amar b'Torah, any set amount of kesef that's in the Torah. Not any time that it says kesef. Sometimes if it says kesef, it may be talking about kesef Medina. But anytime it gives a set amount of kesef in the Torah, kesef tzuri, that's talking about kesef tzuri. B'shel divreim, and if it's the Rabbanim, kesef Medina, then it's talking about kesef Medina. But But the Gemara says to them, "My kamashmalan." But if that's what Rav Yehuda is saying from Rav Asi, so what's he even teaching us? Tanina, we already learned that. We learned Chamesh Saloim. This is in Bechoros. Chamesh Saloim shall ben, Shloshim shall eved, Chamishim shall onis v'shal mefata. If you have the 5 sela of the pidyon haben, if you have the 30 shekel of the eved, you have the 50 shekel fine of the onus and the mefata. Meya shall motzi shemra. You have the 100 shekel fine by the motzi shemra. Kulam b'shekel hakodesh. We're talking all over there in terms of what we call shekel hakodesh, the holy shekel, b'monat suri, which are valued in terms of the monat suri. So we already learned that we're following the suri. And Rashi over here explains, when we're talking about b'shekel hakodesh b'monat suri, that means shekel hakodesh sheyesh b'chafei shkolim. The value of shekel hakodesh is as follows: within 25, every 25 shkolim is monat suri, is a monat suri. Monat suri means 100 dinar of tsuri. And so again, we see that explicitly in Meseches Bechoros. So what's the chiddush? And so the Gemara says, no, the chiddush of Rav Yehuda and Rav Asi is as follows: V'shel divrayim kesef medina tzrichalei. The chiddush is that when we're talking about something that is derabanan, there we follow the local currency, we follow the kesef medina, the lo tanan. That's not learned in a Mishnah, and so that's a chiddush. The Tanya, as we learned in a Braisa, hatokei lechavero. It says, let's say somebody injures his friend, no sein lo sela, so he has to pay a sela. Velo tema. So don't say my sela arba zuzah. Don't say what's the sela. We're talking about suri. We're talking about a 4 zuz sela. Rather, no, ella my sela. Rather, what is a sela? Palga de zuzah. We're referring to a half a zuz. Davidi inshi dekaru la palga de zula istra, because people sometimes call a half a zuz an istra. That's a word for a sela, and that's the sela we're using over here. And that's the chiddush over here, that the interpretation again is according to the value of kesef medina. And Rashi explains, V'shel divrayim mitzrichalei de lo tnan. We need the chiddush of Rav Yehuda and Rav Asi in terms of when the Rabbanan mention kesef, because it's not learned, it's not taught in the Mishnah kama hava, how much is it? V'yashminan do kesef medina. So Rav Yehuda and Rav Asi is teaching that we go by the kesef medina. Kiditanan hatokea kilomar heicham matzinu kesef divrayim kiditanan. Meaning, where do we find that the Rabbanan mentioned kesef, that we need to know how to interpret that? And the answer is, it says hatokei l'chaveru, if somebody strikes his friend bi'azno, by his ear, lashon Rabbeinu Halevi, Rabbeinu Hazakin lamanu sheikeu eitz ala ozen. It's either on his ear or by his ear. So it says over there that no sin lo sela, that the fine is a sela. Kach shiaru dmei boshto la'adam beinani. That's the amount of boshas for an average person. V'yashmein and Rav Asi, and so that's what Rav Asi is teaching us. The lo tema hai sela dalid zuzeh. Don't say that when we use the word sela here, it means 4 zuz, meaning to say it means the sela tsuri, it means the sela of tsuri. Ela palga de zuzah, it's just worth a half a zuz. Shmini sheb sela tsuri. It's 1/8 of the value of a sela tsuri, and istera is a sela. Istera can be called a sela. Palga de zuzah, that's a half a zuz. V'hu sela medina. That refers to the sela medina. That's what Rav Yehuda is teaching us from Rav Asi, that when it uses the word sela over here, it's talking about the sela medina. And the Gemara continues. Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish Omer. Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish says, Tamayu de Beis Shammai. The reason of Beis Shammai that the minimum amount for Kiddushin is a dinar. Kedechizkiah. It follows what Chizkiah teaches when it comes to an eved. To Amar Chizkiah, because Chizkiah said, Amar Kra, the pasuk says v'hafte. It says that she can redeem herself. It's talking about an Amaha Ivriya. So if she works a little for the master, so that amount she deducts, but she can pay back to the master. Malamid shemegaras mi pedyon aviyotz. It teaches that she subtracts from her redemption, meaning whatever amount she worked, she doesn't have to pay that, but the rest she has to pay back the master in order to redeem herself. And so the Gemara now says, if you say that the case is correctly where he originally gave her a dinar, he paid a dinar for her, that's how she can continue to deduct all the way down to a pruta. But if you're going to say he gave her a pruta, he bought her for a pruta, so mi pruta mi megari, you can't deduct it all from a pruta. It would be impossible to fulfill this pasuk. The whole point over here is that she pays him back in order to go free, and she can subtract the amount of labor that she's provided so far, but you can't subtract anything from a pruta, so it must be talking about a dinar, and as we'll see, so we're going to learn out from Amma Ivriya to Kiddushin as well, it must be a dinar. But the Gemara says not necessarily, Vidil Mahachi Kamar, but maybe the pasuk means to say as follows by the Eved. Vidil Mahachi Kamar Achmana, maybe the Torah means to say as follows, Heicha de Yoev la dinar, in a case where he gave her a dinar, Tigrat pruta, so she can deduct all the way down to a pruta, but Heicha de Yoev la pruta, but in a case where he gave her a pruta, lo Tigra klal, she can't deduct it all, because it's impossible to deduct from a pruta, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Yud Beis Amud Aleph.